Hit it.
Hit it. Okay. Welcome everyone to Monday equals MC squared, where this month we're discussing the topic of grief and loss and much, much more. And today is May 10th. Well, here in Colorado, we're going to get some snow again this evening. So send us some sunshine. I have to say, I am getting a little sick of the snow. So I'd like to be able to start getting out there and weed and gather dandelion flowers and start to cook them. I'd like doing that. And we found some wild asparagus in our yard. So that's been kind of fun. I don't know where that came from, maybe from our composter, but anyway, that's kind of the spring update. We still do not have a full spring coming yet. And Chris, you want to say something before I get started on one of the like a grounding thing I want to do today. So
I think all I want to say is acknowledgement, at least at this point today, just to acknowledge all of you who shared difficult experiences that had been a source of grief or grieving for you last week when we opened that up. And that was courageous. And I just wanted to thank everybody for participation and holding that for everyone who had something to share, whether you did or not. So we'll get into this more today. There are a lot of layers to this. So we'll just sink into it little by little.
sounds good. All right. So why don't we bring our attention to the space that you're in? First of all, just kind of check in with your feet. Okay. Adjust your spine and posture so you are connected between the heavens and the earth. It's good to just even look around between the right to left, front to even back, and top and bottom. Just kind of reorient your space that you're in. We just kind of assume that we just exist, but really everything holds us, right? Without this area, location, earth, the sky, we don't exist on this plane. So it's very important to occasionally just kind of tune into, okay, this is where I'm standing. This is where I'm sitting. This is where I am right now. Okay. And I just came across this beautiful practice or something that I just wanted to share. Maybe it's a practice or just kind of a short poem. It's from Carol Milligan. She is a radiation oncologist, an MD. And this is before she goes into the examining room. She kind of chants this or says it quietly to herself. And I thought this would be a great way to connect with your own self too, as we enter into the room together. And we're going to be holding this space together, right? So I thought this would be really good. So it starts like this. As I enter into this new space, may I see and be seen. May I touch and be touched. May I speak and be spoken to. May I feel and be felt. May I experience and be experienced, that we may both become whole. And I'll read that again. As I enter into this new space, may I see and be seen. May I touch and be touched. May I speak and be spoken to. May I feel and be felt. May I experience and be experienced, that we may both become whole. So as we bring our sometimes broken pieces hanging by a thread, or maybe some areas you feel chipped away and you will never be able to build it back on. But as we come and hold each other in this space, I'm hoping we can become whole together. So I thought that little prayer is a very good way to show up to this kind of situation, but with any kind of situation you might be going into. To always know that there's a vulnerability to be seen. And I think a lot of us want to be seen, right? We want to be heard. We want to be noticed. We want to be valued. But in order for us to be seen, for instance, you have to see yourself first. But to be seen, you have to put yourself out there also, right? We can't see you. So you actually step out and say, here I am. Here I am, as what you see is who I am. And I would love for you to see me for who I am. You know, when I work with clients and they say, I just wish that my family members would see me for who I am. But then I come to find out that they're not willing to be vulnerable. So just pause and feel into that. How much are you wishing to be heard and be seen, but you're also not sharing what you really, really feel and what you would love to say? You pull back, or you're afraid of showing up fully. So vulnerability is a part of the grieving process too, because we can't really grieve if we're constantly afraid of being vulnerable. But you know, we were all taught, right, not to grieve as a child, because we were put, I mean, think about it, pacifiers, right? We were put in the pacifiers into the mouth. Okay, so stop crying. Here it is. So we kind of do the same thing to ourselves. Before we can fully get vulnerable and cry out loud, we actually put a pacifier on ourselves and wonder why we're never being heard. How come nobody hears me? Well, what did you put in your mouth? So this isn't just about the symbolic level of pacifiers, but what are you literally putting in your mouth to deal with your own inner emotions and inner thoughts and inner feelings that you wish that others will hear and see in you? But before you even go out there, maybe you already took on something inward and suppressed it. So, but you know, this is our human nature, because we were taught that way. We were taught that way to shut the mouth and to suck on something, eat something, stuff it down, right? So I think it is important that if we want to see the world differently, we want the world to see us differently, you may need to show up differently also. And we know that as spiritual beings. We know this from years of learning about how to be on this earth as this spirits, human beings. We've been all working on this. You wouldn't show up to this call if you haven't been spiritual, right? And working on it, try not to bypass your body or bypass by spiritual bypassing. You've been working on yourself. But stop and notice. In order to be seen, are you showing up? Are you really sharing your vulnerable self? And I think that's the first stage of healing. So I wanted to say that. And I do see, I was looking at my old notes from years ago that I took about grief, and I wrote down grief is like a gateway to opening ourselves to the greater knowing, maybe suchness, maybe greater grace, possibly. But grief is a gateway. But if you don't walk into that gate and go through it, You don't get to this place of all-knowing, the place of stillness, place of, even though the world is always changing, even though the world is always fluctuating, nothing stays the same. We know this. The Taoists have said that thousands and thousands of years ago. All spiritual teachers talk about it, of the impermanence. But I think the grace gives us a gateway to finding that stillness and a place that is always there for you. And you could call it grace, you could call it God, you could call it godlike nature, suchness, whatever you want to call it, it's fine, but that is there. But sometimes we have to walk through that gateway to finding that. So I'll pause there for a moment.
And I'll pick up on this theme, if you don't mind, of impermanence. So we started last week with sharing grief encounters, and many of you shared. And just to hear those was a very moving experience. And I wanted to bring this together with some things that can happen in us around movement in our lives, through our lives, and getting out of situations where we feel stuck, which happens so easily. And grief and loss can certainly be very powerful things that can make us feel stuck. I wanted to tie that with the just the experience of trauma as well, because we're talking about impermanence on one level, which, if you look at it from a spiritual standpoint, impermanence is often represented as being the nature of being itself. It's transitory, it passes. You know, the analogies are often things like waves on the ocean rising and falling. And on a certain level, that can cause us grief and pain as we watch things change and wither, whether it's our bodies or it's people around us, pets, familiar situations, seasons. We watch things change and we watch them pass and fade. And that can create a certain experience of grieving as we encounter those losses. And then there's another aspect to this impermanence, which almost gets hijacked in the experience of trauma, which is that our normal sense of time gets switched off. And so, in almost opposition to that nature of how life moves, the transitoriness, the impermanence, the trauma experience, which can be part of the grieving, is something that disconnects our sense of time. It can feel like this is never going to end. In fact, what we know from trauma studies is that traumatic experiences actually switch off the part of the brain, which is up here in the front right kind of part of the cortex, that allows you to feel and experience the passage of time. So we can actually start to panic and think, well, this is going to go on forever. And so I wanted to open up one theme, which I think probably Masami and I will move around this during this hour. But I wanted to open this idea of touching the wound so it can heal. Okay, touching the wound so it can heal. And I want you to think about what that could be for you. It doesn't have to be anything more than a memory even, but it's something that maybe hasn't quite been heard. It's something that is passed over or ignored in the pursuit of even recovery and healing. And that's something we so often do to ourselves. So I'm going to pause there and see if Masami has anything she'd like to bring in. Otherwise, I'll keep going.
I think it's okay. I mean, we can keep going. I think I just kind of wanted to mention this, is that we live in a society that it's very much lacking in range of motion. So we talk about this a lot, the ROM. Range of motion isn't just about how, if you can touch the toes, right? Or if you have a nice like twistability, right? But the range of motion is for the breathing as well as feeling, and even the temperatures in the house too. And Chris knows this about me, but I don't like to keep my house very, very warm in the winter. And he's good with it. He lived in Toronto, Canada, so he's kind of used to that kind of a climate as well. But I don't, I grew up in Japan where winter's supposed to be cold and summer's supposed to be hot. So I just don't like to make the space always 70 degrees. It's always flat and comfortable. But that's kind of what we've done with our emotions as well, if you really think about it, right? We've created the same kind of thinking in terms of flatlining things. So we go into this like a binary mode. It's like if you're grieving, you've got to get the hell out of that place and then get to the happy place. You have to go there because that's the 70 degrees. You can't go too cold, or you can't get too hot. Like you can't get really angry. You can't be grieving. You can't be, in sadness. Got to get to the perfect place, 70 degrees with the umbrella in your drinks. And it flatlines all of us. And so then we create a society where we don't know how to hold the space for that person to just grieve or express anger. I mean, I told you, anger can be grieving. And I was grieving in anger for years before my dad died. And I witnessed my brother go into rage when my dad actually died. And that was his way of grieving. But it's like, we had to hold the space. I had to hold the space for my brother to express it, but we just want to fix it. And so, the last Monday we said, we're not here to compete with each other's grief, right? And we're also not here to fix it either. We're not here to tell you what to do, or this is a great way to fix it. Sign up for this course. Maybe that could be helpful at the end of this month to have some of those things. But number one, we have to get used to the range of emotions as well as range of temperatures. And we've got to stop flatlining ourselves. And this goes for the medical world too, right? That we flatline people's emotions by giving them antidepressants and anti-anything to just kind of slow down or basically suppress and not let those emotions come out. But they have to come out of somewhere. So you know what happens, everyone? These grief that gets suppressed, they show up as eye issues, ear issues, throat issues, mucus buildup in your lungs, dry cough. And then also a lot of times it's about your digestion, but it's more the lower digestion. So it's the large intestinal issues. You just get constipated, or you may start to have diverticulitis or other itises, like inflammatory conditions. So it has to go somewhere. It's not going to just, because you suppressed it, you flatlined it, it's, you think, okay, we're good. I've moved on. No, it's in you, because it will have to come out somehow. So I think it's important to remember, and, that's why we want to open a space like this. We want to go into, I want to walk through the gateway so that we can all experience grace in sharing, not grace in flatlining each other. So that's kind of what I wanted to say, and to create spaciousness in the space of grief, that we might feel like grief feels restricted and tight, but there's so much spaciousness in that grief. So, and I guess before you go, Chris, if anybody wants to put it in the chat or even raise hands, fine. What have you noticed maybe about grief that has done to your body, or the good that has come, beauty that you've seen through grief? I see spaciousness with grief, right? I see it as a gateway to grace. Maybe some of you have other ways to look at grief. So I would love to hear that. But I'll hand it over to you, Chris, for now.
So one of the quotes that I pulled out, and I thought maybe now's a good time to share it. I'll pop it into the chat here. For those of you that are familiar with Khalil Gibran, this is a quote from the Prophet. And it's not the entire piece of it, but I'll just read this because for me, over many years, this has been one of the best descriptions that I've found about what Masami just talked about, experiencing this range of motion internally that allows us to deepen our experience and at the same time to expand and broaden our perspective and understanding of ourselves and others that may also be hurting. So this is excerpted from the piece that's called On Joy and Sorrow. So the prophet here is speaking and he says, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the selfsame well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven? And is not the lute that soothes your spirit the very wood that was hollowed with knives? When you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. Look deep into your heart, and you shall find that it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. When you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. When you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. So hold that for a moment about what has brought you both joy and sorrow and delight and the opportunity to experience love on some level. And I'm going to mention a couple of the comments that have come in. I think perhaps grief has been so front and center in my life since even pre-verbal times that I do not even recognize grief, much less experience it. And the next one says, I've found that grief can be surprisingly connective. It has helped me find common ground with people I have been at odds with. So here we see that interesting, almost paradoxical presence of grief again, where in one sense, it's a connecting force, and in another, it's a fracturing force. So Masami just read, I don't have it in front of me, she just read a poem to me last night that described the density of grief. It was a long poem, obviously by somebody with a science interest. but they compared grief to the density of a neutron star, which, if you don't know anything about astrophysics, that's okay, but they're super dense stars. And so the comparison was that 1 teaspoon of a neutron star would be like 600 billion tons on Earth. And that's how dense grief is. That it can feel so thick and so potent and dense that it can blind us, and it can remove our sense of time passing and the realization that in certain ways we're actually healing even while we're still in the midst of it but can't feel it. And so there are a couple of other comments that have come in I want to share here. I feel grief as a clean emotion. It's an interesting way to describe it. There is a purity to it, isn't it?
I can feel that though. Oh, I've been there. I know what that clean feels like. It's probably the most amazing internal bathing that you can ever experience is grief. I know what that feels like. Yes. Thanks for saying that.
Sometimes maybe the cleanness and the purity of it is what makes it so hard for us to withstand it.
Yeah. Because it takes you definitely out of this body too. And we look for the density to keep us grounded too. And there's this moment of you're not neither supported by the earth or the heavens kind of a feeling sometimes when you are in the midst of true grief. But there's an amazing clean, I get that feeling. It's so visceral to me when you said that, Alan.
So just before we share a couple of others here, this idea I introduced before about touching the wound in order to heal it, but this is a very difficult thing to hold, because grief can feel like it's going to be our undoing. And so to acknowledge it can feel like you're almost giving permission to the end of yourself. And so, I don't know, this is so important right now because I suspect that many people that gravitate to these Monday calls and other programs that we put on have something of the wounded healer energy in them. Or you probably wouldn't stay interested that long in what we talk about. So I want to say that, that wounded healer energy is so important because it involves coming back again and again to your own wounds and your own griefs, your own losses. And you have to face that in yourself, even while at the same time you're offering relief to others. And so to do that is, this gets back to this theme of impermanence. You have to keep letting it go as it comes up. You have to keep feeling through it as it comes up and let it pass, so that you're not collecting it and weighing yourself down more with it. And so the experience is so interesting socially because we've pretty much learned to be afraid of people who are suffering and people who are grieving. It's almost like it's a contagious disease. And so we don't want to get too close to it. We might do a little pat on the shoulder and say, there, okay, now I did my thing. But it's very hard for us to lean in and get close to that. And part of it is because it reminds us of our own unexplored hurts. And of course it brings that up. Mm-hmm. We can't help but see ourselves in the other person, especially when you are oriented in this way of being drawn to relieve others of their suffering. So there's this, this desire maybe to break away or break free of that weightiness that we feel in other people, to not take it on. But that, I don't know, oftentimes it just seems like we can let ourselves break instead. And if you're the wounded healer and you can relate to this, then you can maybe also understand the next thing I'm going to say, which is that when you break, it's much easier to hide away from that task of helping others. So it becomes a circular thing. You can't tolerate others' pain, but you want to relieve it. But in the end, if you take it on too much, you can end up breaking yourself. And in doing that, you have to withdraw. And then in withdrawing, you ask less of yourself, and you know it. And that becomes a wound. So there's a constant release that we have to do. We have to keep taking things on and keep releasing them. Okay, I'm going to read some more from the...
Hold on, Chris.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say to Cheryl that earlier you read that I think just figuring this out, perhaps grief has been so front and center in my life since even pre-verbal times on. So it's that I do not even recognize grief, much less experience it. So I wanted to kind of come back to that because there is a part of the brain that will try to protect you, particularly the lower lobes of the brain will try to protect you by numbing you. But the fact that you're starting to recognize, you even said just figuring this out, that's the first step. That's the first step. You're starting to become curious because in order to become coming out of the numbness mode that many of us have gone to, numb and freeze mode, okay? That's after years of fight or flight or even pre-birth fight or flight. I was thinking about my mother and I thought of this. And then, because the Mother's Day was yesterday and Chris and I had a long conversation about this too. But after the earthquakes, I found some cassette tapes of my mom's recordings and I happened to listen to one of them. And it was this person that just had me as a baby. I was literally just like a few weeks old. She is recording this to send it to my father, who was at that time living in Bulgaria, saying, basically, please come home soon. I could use some help. Your son is just going nuts. And, meaning my brother. And he was 4 years older than me, just climbing every tree. He's just really out of control. We need you. I need you to be here to help me. And I mean, this entire cassette tape was about asking my dad to come home and please don't stay any longer. He ended up staying in Bulgaria till I was 4 months old and he came back. But so this went on and I'm listening to it. And, I thought, oh my God, the stress this mother had. And in that cassette tape, she was saying that and your daughter just sleeps and sleeps and sleeps. She is just fine. She's easy. But your son, but you know what? I'm thinking to myself, I am right next to where my mom's recording this. I know that's where I was. I'm sure of it. And my mom had to come home on the airplane with my brother, 7 months pregnant or something like that, and flying back from Bulgaria back to Japan to have me. And I have this high sensitivity to cigarette smoke that I can smell cigarette smoke from 2 blocks away if somebody's smoking. And I cannot help it. I think I was so exposed to the cigarette smoke on the airplanes, and my mom ended up developing some sinus issues because of her traveling as well. And I started thinking she was moving from, at that time, very much the red curtain, Bulgaria, right next to Romania, Soviet control. And she was nervous. She didn't even know if she can make it back to Japan. And I have to think about all this stuff because this is pre-verbal. This is pre-me, really. Okay. The level of stress she carried And no wonder my sensitivity is so high. And we do have to recognize that. And what I would recommend, Cheryl, is that you are talking about it now. You're becoming curious about it. Curiosity is the one way that you can get out of that freeze and numb mode. And I just wanted to read just the first a little section of, many of you know this poem by Mary Oliver. And, it's one of my favorite poems, and it's called Wild Geese. And I'll just read that first part. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. And I'll read that again. That last line is my favorite. And that's what I want to say to you, Cheryl. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Let me read that first part again. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. So that's what you're doing, and that's what you're courageously doing now. So thank you for sharing. Yeah.
So we've had this conversation, and this is something Masami and I talk about with some frequency here, is that, many spiritual teachers in recent years have talked about dropping your stories, as if talking about your experience is equal to being stuck in it. And I think both of us have fallen on the side of it's important to have stories. And in fact, stories are how we as humans learn and understand things about ourselves and the world and each other. And the important thing is not to have no stories or somehow drop them, but to move through them, to let them work on you and then let them go when they're done. And that's sort of what the dropping the story is really getting at. But it comes in stages. And just like the grieving, it doesn't happen all at once. It's a subtle, at times, very subtle process. And at other times it's like a hammer in the forehead, very unsubtle. So I want to come back to the chat again, because we're having some.
Yeah, let's read some of those, Chris.
The observations that are being made are incredibly important and also very much on point with what we're talking about. I'll just scan through a couple of these. Grief and joy are a paradox, ultimately one and the same. I've learned to dialogue with my grief, asking it what it has come to teach me. And that's an important thing to sit with. That's what the Khalil Gibran quote that I read was really about, is holding that paradox and asking, what does this inner strain that we feel as that carving of capacity is happening? What is it trying to tell us? What is it showing us? This one is an important observation for many people, I think. I attended your class last Monday, just the day after learning about my nephew's sudden death. And so just an aside, last Monday is when we invited people to share experiences of grief, and we spent most of the hour doing that. It seemed like a good time to take your class, yet I couldn't seem to stay awake. I apologize. Is zoning out or falling asleep part of the body's self-protection mechanisms, like shutting down if info is coming in that I was not ready to receive?
Mm.
I, I think you answered your question, but the short answer is yes.
Yes,
Our,
absolutely.
our body has many ways that are intelligent to protect itself from too much of anything. And that would be one: falling asleep, passing out, feeling a visceral or physical repulsion to something. Those are all signs that the body gives us that we need to listen to. And I'm glad you did, even if it meant that you had to listen to the recording instead of the live call. I want to read some more of these. Um, I was my husband's care provider, and because he suffered for a long time, it gave us a chance to talk about many things, from anger that he was dying and leaving me alone to expressing joyfulness for all that we experienced together. I'm so grateful for the range of communication between us that goes on even today, 2 years
Mm.
after he passed.
Mm.
For me, as a wounded healer, I feel intimacy and connectedness in the depths of grief. And how could we not? We're all tender in that depth. This next one: my recent experience resonates with many of the strands mentioned so far. Having stopped smoking 2 weeks ago, a major addiction, soother, and suppressor for me, almost immediately a huge wave of grief came up. And for the first time in so many years, I was able to really allow it. Or maybe I kind of had no choice anymore.
Mm.
The tears really felt so pure and flowed so freely. It was blessed relief, that cleansed and clean aspect, so beautiful, actually. Yeah, that's a powerful observation of how we use things around us, things we call addictions, stuff, relationships, food, to fill that gap, fill the void that we're trying to, or hide the void that has opened up in our grief.
And particularly smoking is one of the, I would say, often used way of suppressing or not wanting to feel the grief, because your grief gets stored in a very deep part of the lobes of your lungs, and smoking it up and hiding it, you don't have to tend to it. And I have this conversation with my brother often. He's been a smoker since he was 17 years old. And we both know we don't need to, go into how horrible smoking is. He already knows. All smokers know. They don't need to hear that. But every time he would talk to me, he goes, well, maybe I should quit and da da da. I think there's a funny quote by Mark Twain or something like, I know how to quit smoking or something like that. I've tried quitting it many times or something. I don't know. But the fact is, it's my brother way of coping with his grief. And just to give you a little story about my brother is that when I was 7 and when he was about 10, he was almost 11, he got sent away to the United States by himself to live with a foster home. And he moved 4 foster homes till he graduated from high school. And, he didn't know anything. I mean, he literally knew how to write A and B as English language. That was it. And how he got dropped off was that my dad dropped him off at this one house. And this couple didn't even have children, never even had a children. And here comes this confused, angry, grieving 10-year-old. And he goes through this trauma after trauma, And, my dad basically said, son, I'll be back. And I'm just going to go to the grocery store. And he never came back. So you can imagine the grief my brother carries. So I tell him, when you smoke in the morning, I want you to really know what that's doing for your grief and to really appreciate it. because it's keeping you on this earth. But at the same time, I'm proud of you, Jim, for quitting smoking. But if you don't address your grief, you could easily go back to smoking. So you're doing the right path by addressing your sadness, grief, even anger, abandonment, resentment. It could be something that you regret. That could also show up in the lungs too. It's just that I can't guide my brother through this process. He's not able to go there right now. And I don't know if he ever will, but you still love the person, fully, because I see him as a whole person. So that's what I can do for him. But please know that there are ways that we survive through our addictions. It's our way of being on this earth. Yeah. Thanks for letting me share that story.
So something to circle back to what I said earlier about the wounded healer and all of that is that, when we come close to our own grief and pain, that's also coming close to the core of who we are, the creative core of who we are. And so the more that we can include that into our experience and our being, the more that we can reach into that place where we can also reimagine new possibilities for how things can be in ourselves and beyond ourselves. So there's that, again, that almost paradoxical nature of it where it feels like complete crushing breakdown, but it's also the creative spark of what we are. It's right next to it, at least, if it's not one and the same thing. And so I want to come back to a couple more of these comments.
Yeah.
Some great comments and questions coming in. The next one is, how do we become skilled at the releasing of grief without overwhelming ourselves?
Did you skip the one above it? I've had a strange experience.
Oh, I guess I did.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, let's go back up. I've had a strange experience with grief where I felt the density and sadness and heavy emotions. But when that begins to pass, I find another aspect of what I'm grieving about to hold on to and stay in that space of heavy emotions, because it doesn't feel okay to let go. Somehow letting go means I'm letting go of who or what I'm grieving about. So let's hold that one for a moment, because the next one, which is a question, I think is very connected to it, which is, how do we become skilled at the releasing of grief without overwhelming ourselves and further draining our adrenals? So that's a really specific, practical question there, but it's related to the last comment. And I'm going to give one perspective, and I'm sure Masami will have something to say about these too. For the question about how do we become skilled, this is part of that retraining ourselves in being aware of, again, the impermanence, the things that are passing, to become skilled at holding the grief without burning ourselves out with it again. We have to learn how to tolerate it just a little bit at a time. So we don't need to turn on the full tap. We can just get a taste of it, and then maybe that's enough, and we can come back to our balance that we already have access to. And then we can lean to it again. And maybe that time we can take just a little bit more of it, or for a little bit longer, we can stay in that, like just above. The staying with it is actually, that's a key part of moving through it, actually, is you have to stay with it long enough for it to say everything that it has to say. So we're not trying to get out of it or deny it or anything like that. We have to sit with it. We have to feel it. We have to let it move through us. And that's what the role of emotions are in our systems, is to move us from one state to another. So we have to let them do that. We have to let them give their voice. And so, again, back to that question, take it in small doses at first. Build up your tolerance to it. Try to sit with it for maybe just 10 seconds at a time and just feel it for 10 seconds, and then do what you need to do. Let your body return to its defenses if that's what it's calling for. But see if you can just stay with it for a little bit longer over time, and just learn how to accept and tolerate that it's there first.
Yeah. Let's keep reading. I mean, I have a lot to say about that, but I'm looking at the time too, and I want to be able to share these. Yeah.
Okay. Some of these are just observations. Some of these are maybe shared experience.
Can you read the Maria's one?
Yes, I was about to read that one next. I was born in a family where war had left a black cloud of toxic grief expressed in anger and hostility. As a little girl, I was feeling the grieving of the whole family, but I couldn't let it be seen as it was not safe. Due to fear of being a burden and abused with anger, which had been the story of my entire life, suffering alone due to societal taboos and family's denial. So yeah, grief is often the experience of being silenced or disavowed. And the next one is somewhat in the same vein of white American culture, especially in the past, really negated grief and other hard emotions, especially for females. We spent 15 minutes acknowledging my father's death. I finally, after decades, was able to write a poem about it, realizing I'm okay with so much family grief now. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of cultural things too. You know, I lived in Korea for a while, and I noticed that in Japan we call Korea as like close but far away country, because even though we share so much of the similarities, we don't do like the cultural differences are definitely there between Koreans and Japanese. But the part that I saw the most is how they grieve versus how Japanese grieve. Koreans are very vocal about their cries and their way of sharing their sorrows. They are very expressive. And then when I, go back to Japan, there's a lot of like holding back. They don't show the tears. You don't cry out loud. It's not polite to, so we kind of bring that similar concepts to different cultures as well, different backgrounds that you come from too. So you want to look into that too. How am I going to grieve that is maybe outside of what you were taught? Maybe that is one way to begin healing, is that you don't grieve the same way your grandparents did or your mother did. Maybe try differently, emote differently. That could be the curiosity part of the brain that kicks in and says, okay, we're not in danger. Because if you're in danger, you won't be curious about anything. You'll just be running or numbing, right? Thanks.
So also thank you to...
I love it. The Mark Twain's quotes.
Put in the Mark Twain quote. Yeah, you can read that one.
Giving up smoking is easy. I've done it hundreds of times. Yes, exactly. That's the one I was thinking about. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, thank you for all that have commented back about what we're doing today, and just for all those mentions. I wanted to read, there's one other one that this was a very thoughtful comment. As to letting go of grief, I've started thinking about myself as a mesh screen, and things are to move through that screen. The big pieces don't move until they are ready. My part is to not block the screen. So thank you for that piece of perspective. I think I actually want to read that one more time. As to letting go of grief, I've started thinking about myself as a mesh screen, and things are to move through that screen. The big pieces don't move until they're ready. My part is to not block the screen.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. Could you read the one underneath that?
Yes. So yes, Maria, she says, thank you so much for letting me know about the importance of being seen. I'm finally feeling a gentle peace and sweet exhaustion. Oh, those are great ways of saying it there. Gentle peace and sweet exhaustion. Just for having the courage to join this group and facing the fear of being seen.
Mm. You're a one courageous person, you. Love it. Love it. Thanks for showing up. And I don't know, Chris, you missed this one way at the top, but I don't know, maybe I just didn't hear it, but says, I've found that grief can be surprisingly connective. It has helped me find common ground with people I have been at odds with.
Yeah, I did read that one,
Okay.
but we've seen that echo throughout here, and there have been. If I missed a couple of your comments, I apologize. The screen jumps around when people are entering in, but I think that was also mentioned by somebody else. The connection and.
You're welcome, Alan. He says, thanks for opening up this space to explore this dark emotion, quote unquote dark. I've really experienced light at the end of this tunnel.
Can I just say to that, I've said this before. It was a line that came to me a few years ago, and it was that the darkness is the light we cannot see. Okay, darkness is the light we cannot see. So when I think about, and for that comment there about this being a dark emotion, I totally agree with that. But dark in the sense of hidden and not illuminated most of the time. This is a whole other topic for me that I would love to spin off on, because it opens up the question about the dark night of the soul, and just a little bit of a hint of where you might chew on this for a little while is that analogy of the dark night of the soul by it's the poem by St. John of the Cross, and he's describing his internal torment where he feels separated from God during a time where he's been imprisoned during the Inquisition. And what he comes away with is this understanding. He writes this long poem about it, but his understanding is that the darkness is so deep in that dark night of the soul because the intensity of the divine light is so bright. And so the shadow that's being cast seems to swallow him whole. So there's this play between dark and light. And so I just think that this is a perfect way for us to come to the end of our hour here, actually, and acknowledge this dark emotion as one that is only dark because it's unexplored and hidden from us most of the time. And that as we explore it, we are able to experience more and more layers of what we see here, the sweet relief and the relaxation around it, and the sense of joy that has actually been hiding alongside it. And thank you to Marilyn for pointing out that today is the dark moon phase with the new moon tomorrow morning.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I think we're going to have a little bit more kind of a calming week, everyone. I don't know, you've felt the last 2 weeks has been a little crazy. I don't know you felt that, but my eating habits went out the door. I have no idea. I haven't even cooked anything. Chris and I went grocery shopping, and then I looked at the 2 bunches of kale and I was just like, I'm not eating this. So it just sat in our refrigerator for a week, and then now it's yellow. So I'm like, ooh, this gives me a chance to put it in my compost now. So it's just little out there right now, right? But this week, I think it's going to have a little bit of a calming feeling. So enjoy, because I'm not trying to scare you guys, but I do sense there's going to be a little bit of a turmoil. towards the last part of this month. So it's the calm before the storm, possibly. So you want to replenish yourself, get lots of sleep. And I don't know any of you have been noticing this, but you may be needing a lot more sleep this week. Okay. A lot more sleep, a lot more rest, a lot more like your time. So know that, and that's okay. And I wanted to actually tell you a funny story. I know we'll have to be done, but I just keep thinking about it. So I'm going to share. So this was a couple of years, well, several years ago. I went to visit where my brother grew up, and I went to one of my brother's foster family's weddings or something like that. And they had this trampoline outside. And there was this cute girl, 10-year-old girl that was doing a trampoline. And I always wanted to be on the trampoline, but I've only done it like once. So I was a little nervous, but I said, I called on that girl and then I said, hey, can I bounce with you? And then she goes, yeah, come on up. So I'm like gingerly getting up, and then, she's just going like crazy. And then I just kind of like started to jump, but it's basically mostly I'm jumping because she's jumping. So I'm in a reflex kind of I'm having to jump because she's jumping, and I'm all nervous and I'm a little scared. I have a fear of heights that I'll tell you sometime, but I never had a fear of heights till I was told that I had to come to the US, and then I have become so fearful of heights. And so I was having a hard time jumping. And then she looks at me, she goes, jump like you mean it. And I just looked at her, I'm like, you're right. I need to jump like I mean it. So she goes, yeah, you can do it. And so I was like, do you think I can jump like I mean it? And I started laughing, and I started jumping like I meant it, really. And it felt amazing. And then her parents called, and then, they were going to go home. And so she had to get off the trampoline. And then, so she gets in the car, she gets picked up, and then she drives by the trampoline as the car is pulling up. She rolls down the window and she screams, jump like you mean it, and I feel like that's how we have to live, jump like you mean it, grieve like you mean it. Okay. Grieve like you just mean it, and enjoy the joy like you mean it. And that's a 10-year-old taught me that. And I had it on my note, and I even had it highlighted. This is a note from that time. And I was like, oh yeah, I put trampoline, jump like you mean it. So if we can live from our heart center and feel it and stop flatlining ourselves, and let's all jump like we mean it. All right. Can we do that? So I just had to share that story.
I want to, before we close out, I want to just say that was just a few years ago. That's not when Masami was a kid. And
No.
Secondly, Masami is not only afraid of heights, but she provoked me last year to take her on a zip line on the biggest zip line course in Colorado, which is one of the top 5 in the world for its size. And we did it. She did the whole thing. So
kicking and screaming, and I don't think I've ever want to do it again. But I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
We thought we were going to have to abandon ship a few times, but she did it. She made it across all of the lines and made it to the final point. So,
yeah. Also, I think live like you mean it, everyone. Life is so short. It's so impermanent. This moment will never come back. So be here like you mean it. Breathe like you mean it. Live it like you mean it. That's what that 10-year-old taught me. And I hope you could do that same. So don't be afraid of any of your emotions. Don't be afraid. Jump on it. Jump as high as you can with it. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And we will see you next Monday. Namaste. Bye.